Hi students, welcome to our science class. Our chapter name is Force, Work and Energy. In the last few classes we are discussing about the topic force. How we define the term force? Force is a push or pull act on a body or object. So that is force. And after discussing that, we discussed about different types of force. We studied different names of force or different types of force, and in the last class we discussed about magnetic force. Magnetic force means the force acts between magnets or the force caused by the magnet. We can simply say it like that. So that's about the magnetic force. We studied in detail about that. Then we discussed about electrostatic force. This force is because of the charges, and we can say when two surfaces rub together, there occurs electrostatic force. And after that we discussed about gravitational force. Gravitational force. We know all the objects are attracting towards the earth. That is actually the example for gravitational force. Or simply we can say, when an object is dropped upward, then what happens? That is attracted to downward. Or simply we can say, when two objects are there placed, between that two objects it have a certain attractive force, and that is gravitational force. These are the things we discussed in the last class. Now we are going to discuss about the next type of force, that is buoyant force. Buoyant force. Buoyant force, or it also have the name buoyancy, or buoyancy. You can simply call it as buoyancy or buoyant force. Now the question is this: what is this buoyant force? We can check what is this. That I'm just taking a beaker filled with water. I'm just taking a beaker and filling it with water and drop one plastic ball. Plastic ball. And another thing, a golden ring. A golden ring. I'm just taking and put. What you can see? You can see that the plastic ball will stay at the top of the water. And do this golden ring will stay at the top of the water? No. That will move to downward and will be there at the bottom of the beaker inside the water. So, why this ball is there at the top and why this golden ring is at bottom? You may think that this ball is less weight and the ring is having higher weight, and that's why it's there at bottom. Then I will show you another example. This is the sea, and one boat is there on the surface of water. Now, is this ring is much weighter than this boat? No. This boat have higher mass or weight than this ring. But still this boat is there at the top of the water and it is not sinking down. And what's the reason? And another thing, when I am pressing this ball towards down, what happens? I am just pushing this and giving force on this and just release my hand. Again what happens? You can see that this ball will move to upward itself. That means inside this water there is having a certain force that is giving a force upward. And what's the name of that force? The name of that force is nothing but the buoyant force. Buoyant force. So simply we can say that same buoyant force is there for the boat also. That buoyant force make it this boat stable on the surface of water. So we can say this is a beaker filled with water, and generally we can say when an object is there inside the water, two types of force are acting. Two types of force. One force is downward and another force is upward. This downward force is our gravitational force. We already studied about that. And the upward force is nothing but the buoyant force or buoyancy. Buoyancy. So we can say for some objects this buoyancy is greater than gravitational force. Such objects will float on water. And some objects have gravitational force greater than this buoyancy, and that objects will be there at the bottom. That means for the golden ring, it is having gravitational force more than this buoyancy, and that's why it is there at the bottom of the beaker. And for the plastic ball, what's that? It is having buoyancy greater than gravitational force, and so that is stable or that stay at the surface of water. So this is about the buoyancy. I hope it's clear. You just want to remember within the water there are two types of force acting. One is gravitational force downward, and another force is this buoyancy or buoyant force that is towards upward. So now we are going to study the definition of buoyancy or buoyant force. The definition is this: the upward force acting on an object, the upward force acting on an object in water is called buoyant force. So this is the simple definition. The upward force, here the direction is very important. The force is there towards up. The upward force acting on an object in water, we are experiencing in water, is called what? Buoyant force. This is the definition. The upward force acting on an object in water is called buoyant force. This is the definition. And you just want to remember the cases that when we are dropping a plastic ball on a beaker, then that plastic ball will be stable at the surface of water, or the ship is stay at the surface of water. It is not sinking. All the reason is our buoyant force. This is all about buoyant force. Now we are going to discuss about the next type of force, that is frictional force. Frictional force. What is this frictional force? Now we are going to study this frictional force. This is one ball. I am just giving a certain force, and this ball start to move. And after some time, what happens to this ball? That ball will move, and then it will stop. It will stop at a point. Why? What's the reason this ball is getting stopped? We studied that for stopping an object we want to give a force. So who is giving that force? Actually that force is our frictional force. Don't think the gravitational force is there towards down, and here the force that stopped this ball is nothing but the frictional force. And another example, this is a floor, and I am just adding some oil on the surface. And one person who just wore one shoe and walking through this floor, what happens? He will fall down because of this oil, and he will get slip. Why? What's the reason? The reason is this. Here, a particular force is very less. That's why he just got slip. Actually, the force that is there is our frictional force. If there is frictional force, then this person can simply walk through that. If the frictional force is less, then this person feels difficulty to walk. So that's all the introduction for this frictional force. Now we are going to study in detail about the frictional force. I already said that this ball is rolling and after some time it stops. That means here some sort of force is opposing the motion of this ball. That is actually the frictional force. So we can say it like that. A force always opposes the motion. That is what our frictional force. Always the friction opposes the motion. That means when the ball is moving at this direction, then the frictional force will act in this direction, opposite to the direction of motion. That is our frictional force. Now the question is this, why this frictional force is acting? The reason is very simple. This frictional force acts between two surfaces. For example, this is the floor and this is the ball. Between this ball and the floor, between two surfaces, this frictional force is acting. And how this frictional force acting? It is very simple. On the surface of the ball, it is having number of small pores are there. And also for the floor, it is also having number of pores are there. Now, when they are moving from one to another, then these pores are getting interlocked. And that's how the frictional force acting. That means when the paper is moving through the surface of the textbook, there also acts some friction. So on the surface of this paper, it is having number of pores are there. It is not possible to see, but when we are looking through some microscope and all, we can see that pores. So here we have number of pores, and on the textbook also we have pores. When this paper is moving through the surface of the textbook, then they are getting interlocked. And because of that reason, on this have pores, on this floor also pores, and because of the interlocking, that opposes the motion, and that's how we can say the act frictional force. So we can study the definition like this for the frictional force. This is the definition. Force that slow down the movement of object across a surface is called frictional force or force of friction. So this is the definition. Force that slow down the movement. That means it opposes the motion. Slow down the movement of object across a surface. That means when two objects are away, there is having no frictional force. When they are moving from each other, then there acts frictional force. So the force that slow down the movement of object across a surface is called frictional force. So that's the definition. And this frictional force have another name, that is force of resistance. Force of resistance. The reason is this frictional force opposes the motion, and because of that it is also called force of resistance. Force of resistance. So that's all about this. And within your textbook you can see one activity, that is very simple activity, that taking two big huge blocks. This is there at a smooth surface and this is there at a rough surface. So this is smooth and this is rough. And the thing is, this one person is standing here and push this. Here also one person standing and push. It is easy to push. The answer is very simple. This can easily move and on the rough surface it is difficult to move this block. What is the reason? The reason is this because of the difference in the frictional force. For the smooth surface, friction is less. For the smooth surface, friction is less. The reason is this: for the smooth surface, the pores are very less. And for the rough surface, there the pores are more, and because of that we can say friction high. That's why this person feel difficulty to push that block. So just remember, for the smooth surface, friction is less, and for the rough surface, friction is high. That's only about this activity. And now we are going to study the advantages of friction and also the disadvantages. For this friction, at the same time it is having advantages and also it is having disadvantages. So this is very important. The advantages of friction and disadvantages of friction. First we are going to discuss about the advantages. Who help us to walk? Don't think that for our legs. Actually, it's possible to walk because of the help of friction. If there is no friction, we will just slip away. So we can say it helps to walk. It helps to walk. That means it helps to move or it helps to grip for the surface. That's why we can say it helps to walk. Now, the next is about the vehicles. You can see some sort of designs are there on the tires. That is actually to increase the friction. If there is no such things and if our roads are very smooth, what happens? Our vehicles have no control. So, that also the advantage of friction. We can say this friction give grip to vehicles. Friction give grip to vehicles. The next point is this: how I can write on this blackboard. The reason is this: between this chalk and on the surface of the board there is having friction. Because of that reason I can write. Or on your book or on the paper and the pen, in between the pen and paper there is having friction, and that's why we can write. So we can simply write. We can write because of friction. We can write because of friction. The reason is this: between the paper and pen or between the paper and pencil there is having friction, and because of that we can write. If there is no friction, it is not possible to write. And another thing is this: when we are selecting a paper which is just spread the oil, it is very difficult to write. What's the reason? The reason is this: when we are applying oil, then the friction will be less, and that's why we feel difficulty to write on the paper which is having oil. The next point is this: how we can erase the pencil writings on paper. That also they apply the friction. So we can write friction helps erase. Friction helps to erase the pencil writing on the paper. There also acts the friction. Now we are going to discuss about the disadvantages. When you are continuously rubbing your finger on your hand, what you can feel? You can feel hot or they produce heat. That is because of the friction. When I am rubbing this finger on my hand, there is having two surfaces. When these are getting rubbed each other, they produce friction and they also produce heat energy. This heat energy is one disadvantage of our friction. So it produces heat. And also when the mixer, grinder and all working, when you touch, you can feel the heat there. That also the disadvantage of the friction, and that will damage the machine. So heat produced and machines damaged. This is one of the disadvantage of our friction. What is another disadvantage of friction? So when we are walking through the road, you can see that the chappals are getting damaged. The reason is our frictional force. We can write like this: friction damage tires and soles of chappals. Friction damage tires and soles of chappal. When we are walking, we can see that the surface of chappal is getting damaged because of the friction. And the another disadvantage of the friction is the fuel lossage. Fuel lossage. That means it leads to the lossage of fuel. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of our friction. Just remember these points. That's all. So this is all about our frictional force. Now we are going to discuss about the muscular force. This is very simple. Muscular force. Here I am just using my muscles to drop this, or I am just using my muscles to push this, or I am using my muscles to walk. These all are what? Muscular force. So we can say the force produced by muscles known as muscular force. So this is the definition of muscular force. The force produced by muscles are called muscular force. That means when we are taking a bucket of water, we are using the muscular force. Or when I am walking, I am using the muscular force. The force from my muscles. So that is what the muscular force. Only the definition about this muscular force. So that's all about the muscular force. And the final force in your textbook is this mechanical force. That is also very simple. You just want to study the definition only. Mechanical force. When I want to cut this paper, what I use? I will use scissors. What is the force that is acting within that scissors? Or they have muscular force and all, but I am asking about the within that machine, what's the force? So, one scissors. What force is there within the scissors? Next, we can think about the bulldozers. We are using to pull soil or push soil. What is this? Bulldozers have the force. What type of force is there within the bulldozers? And the another example is about the tractors. It's used to pull trailer. And within this scissors, this bulldozer with tractor, what type of force is there inside these all? These all are actually what? Machines. These all are machines. And within this, the force mechanical force. That means these all machines are using the mechanical force. So we are going to study the definition for this mechanical force. Very simple. It is the force. It is the force that an object gets from its position and motion. For all and that machines, for the scissors, for the bulldozers, for the tractor, all have its own motion. So because of that it is utilizing the mechanical force. So we can say the definition as it is the force that an object gets. One object is getting this type of force from its position and motion. From its position and motion. Different types of mechanical forces are there. You will study it in detail in your higher classes. Now you just want to study this definition. It is the force that an object gets from its position and motion. Only the definition. So here the types of force is over. You just want to read your textbook and also want to study these all things. And now I am giving you one simple work as homework. Just take your textbook on page number 101. There you can see one green box. Here 2 questions are there. Just solve it. Very simple questions. That's the work for today. So today we discussed about the types of force. And this is all today's topic, and next class we are going to discuss about work. We will meet in the next class with the further topics. Thank you.